thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and student documents.
All the countries are used to
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, at the top of the hour, let me thank you for your wonderful calls, emails, and text messages concerning shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, but particularly your great ideas for suggestions and guests to be aired on future segments of this wonderful show, because this, after all, is your community affairs, public affairs show here on HCC TV now, proudly starting its 26th year. Particularly over the holidays, I want to thank you very much for the communications we had about this year of 2020 of the vision. This is also the 50th anniversary of Houston Community College. We'll be featuring lots of things that talked about the past and the present, but more importantly, focus on the future. It is that future that we really want to dive into. In a short 16 years, in 2036, the city of Houston will celebrate its bicentennial. We need to really think about what we want that city, our city, to be like, how we interact with each other as human beings, how we look and take care of each other as human beings. What does it mean to have a sense of who we are as Houstonians in a changing demographic environment? All those things we want to dive into, dwell deeply on this show. We have a lot of guests and topics kind of lined up to do that. Our good friend, Dr. Stephen Kleinberg at Rice, who does our annual survey of Houstonians' thoughts around a myriad of issues, will also be part of that process. He has his book coming out in April, and we're going to make sure we feature that. One of the issues that is going to be talked about as this journey for the next 16 years to 2036 is poverty. We're now in the second era of the resegregation of Houston public schools as we know it, urban public education. As a child and a product, since we're taping here on January 15, Dr. King's birthday, as a child and a product of the first era of segregated schools, being segregated and being poor was an issue, but it was not the main issue because there was so much unconditional love, so much community involvement, so much adults involved other than parents involved. That famous Latin phrase, in loco parentis, kicked in. We had more adults helping children than we could stand a stick. So the question has to be, in the second era of the resegregation, in a school district that is now 89% what we used to call minority children, which are now the new unempowered majority, 89%, where do we go from here? Those of you who have a history in Houston know there was something in 1972 called the Westheimer Independent School District that tried to break away from the Houston Independent School District to create this all-white district on the west side. It didn't happen. For lots of reasons. Some say perhaps it should have happened because if it would have happened, the school district would have been forced to deal with the urban and inner city and poverty issues much sooner than it has to now. So in the second era of segregation, it's about poverty and race. The first era of segregation, it was about race and poverty. Doesn't really matter which goes first. The question we have to ask, and why I'm so happy to have the guests that we have now on Dialogue Houston, is to look at what poverty really is and what it is not. I always say when you dive deeply into something, you get to see the converse, what it is and therefore what it is not. So Donna Beegle, who is our guest this day, who is also here for the conference on no poverty that we're doing again at the University of St. Thomas with Catholic Charities as the lead, is here to help us understand that. She is uniquely qualified to help us look and understand poverty. Donna grew up in a fourth-generation household of migrant labor poverty, real poverty, where even with minimum wage, they never could get out of poverty as a family. She's the only member of her family that was never incarcerated. She left school at 15 for marriage, had 2 children. At age 25, found herself with no husband, little education, and no job skills. With the help of many federal poverty programs, she got her GED, an associate's degree in journalism, a BA in the wonderful area of communication with honors, a master's degree in communication, and a PhD in education. She now is the president of Communication Across Barriers, a consultant firm devoted to improving communication relationships across poverty barriers. What I can tell you from reading her material, from just spending the little time I've spent with her prior to us taping here today, this is the lady you want to carefully listen to about the two faces of poverty. What the individual human being who is in poverty and what the concept of other human beings who are not in poverty about those who are in poverty. It's a two-sided coin. I think Donna, the way she talks about it, does it better than anybody else to have you understand that there is two sides of poverty. Donna, welcome.
Thank you so much for focusing on this issue, and thanks for the work you're doing here to really get the community together to talk about important social
That was probably
issues.
too long of an introduction, but that's okay because I wanted to really set the stage and the context so that as you talk through the stuff in the text, people understand that it is experiential of having lived it that gives you the ability to speak to it in the ways that you do. And I will always refer to this as our daily lived experiential realities are just different.
True.
Not better than, not more
True.
than, not less than.
Oh, so true.
Just different. Different is
So
different,
very
amen, period,
true.
is my phrase. If we could just leave it at that and understand that we can learn from each other because of those differences, we could progress a lot easier on some of these issues. But everybody wants to be the expert who's never lived in haven't walked in anybody else's shoes, but yet I know better about you than you know about
Yes.
yourself.
Yes.
So let's dive into this issue of poverty.
Well, I tell you, I did grow up in generations of migrant labor poverty with 5 brothers, so I can talk about fighting my brothers for the back window of the car, because if you get the back window, you can see the stars.
That's true. That's true.
I can talk about watching my mom go hungry so that the kids could eat, or my dad working 16 hours and saying, should I give a little to the landlord or save some back for the
The
food?
minimum wage, you can't do it.
You can't. It is, minimum wage is not a living wage.
Right.
So I do bring that perspective of having been born into the deepest poverty in our country, which is generations of it. And most of my family members not literate, so making X's for their names. The few that were somewhat literate could maybe read a little bit, but if you put a newspaper in front of them,
Right.
they couldn't read that newspaper because they wouldn't know the words in there or even know the inferences. That would have been me at age 26. I dropped out of school at 15 and got married. Married a guy, I don't know if you'd be surprised, but he was from generations of migrant labor poverty.
Right, right.
And I always tell folks, you know, how did I manage to find a guy who lived exactly like we did? They worked that day for food that night. And as a scholar now, I know the answer is the segregation by social class. The isolation of poverty perpetuates it.
Yes, it does. And it is a class and caste thing as much as it is anything else.
That's exactly right. Yes, so I married, and you know, I said ain't every other word. I didn't know when to say gone or went or how. Those people know when to say seen or saw. I did not even know that I wasn't speaking middle class sentence structure.
Right.
But I knew my entire life people couldn't hear me. I would literally watch 2 helping professionals talk to each other about my life, never saying, what do you think, or what would you do?
Right.
Until I was 28, I got to University of Portland, and I had a wonderful mentor named Dr. Bob Fulford, who had studied language and social class his whole career.
Okay.
And he said to me, I want to help you learn a second language. And I was 28. I had a bad perm from my cousin Wanda. I was driving a car big as this room. I'm like, what? And he said, Donna, when middle-class people speak, they use a very specific sentence structure. They use vocabulary they have heard since they were in the womb by adults who can contextualize those words.
Right.
And they talk about things they're around all the time. Because of the segregation by social class, you're not going to be exposed to that. He said, you communicate beautifully, but let me give you a language that will help you in education.
So it's like learning English as a second language.
Well, and
all over it.
he did. He warned me. He said, be careful, because if you get tired, your grammar may revert.
Right.
So I was training 9,000 teachers at a Title I event, and I heard the word worser come out. I was like horrified. But it is, but once I learned middle-class sentence structure, could use middle-class reference points, people would say, what do you think? And so many times I was like, I would have told you the same thing. I would have said ain't.
Right,
And I would
right.
use different contextual examples because I'm the same person. But often we equate IQ and whether or not someone has something to offer with the way they talk, what they're wearing.
Yes. And we judge quickly.
And we leave them out.
Yes.
And so a lot of times our efforts are coming in saying, we could fix you. We know
Right.
what they, not
Right.
hearing, here's what's really in our way.
Yeah.
So I bring that perspective. I did go back to school at 26 and got my GED. And then I studied poverty to the doctoral level, so I can talk evidence-based best practices. I've written 5 books. I've worked in all 50 states and now 8 countries. This is more than work to me. I tell people I know too much to be quiet.
Right.
We are losing so many kids, so many adults, so many seniors to that evil villain poverty.
And a lot of it has to do with this sense of belonging, does it not?
Absolutely.
That I think there's this need as a human being to have that fulfilled in part of our being, and when it's not, we just kind of go off the rails.
Well, if you can feel when you're not wanted.
Right.
You can feel.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I've had teachers say, "Well, I didn't tell them I didn't want them in my class,"
Right.
and I'm like, "How many of you have been in a conversation with someone and you're talking a couple minutes and you realize someone doesn't like you?"
Yes.
Did they have to tell you?
No.
No, because most communication is nonverbal.
Right.
So our attitudes and beliefs about people who live in the crisis of poverty will come through our facial expressions, who we go out of our way for. All of that will determine these interactions that we have.
Donna, we're going to have to take a small pause and break, and we'll be right back. When we come back, we're going to be looking at this issue of poverty as to what you can do. How can you help? How can you get involved? And if you really know the issues and the important things about having new knowledge around this issue, you can do more. You can get involved because you have a choice to make. How deeply you want to get involved, how deep and strong is your unconditional love around this issue to get involved, all those things come into play. We talk a lot about servant leadership on this show. This is one of those issues that true servant leadership rises to the occasion. We'll be right back.
This is Ronik. She's a mom with a physics degree, so she understands the power of momentum. And she knows that by learning English at Houston Community College, she'll be unstoppable. HCC, for everyone, anytime.
I don't know an industry today that doesn't rely on some amount of coding to run their business. Coding is the 21st century equivalent of the English language. And our particular flavor of this is the iOS Coding and Design School. And Apple's been very supportive and in fact joined with us to roll out the start of this Swift programming initiative. So it's a great opportunity to combine creativity with science and technology, contributing to this app economy.
Meet Travion. His mom went to Houston Community College, so choosing that was easy. Choosing what to study from more than 100 instructional fields? Not so much. HCC, for everyone, anytime.
The ability to effectively exercise your advocacy, your servant leadership, your unconditional love depends on your knowledge base. So we're going to talk about the 4 types of poverty so you can really understand and then help decide what you really want to do and how you want to get involved. From the charity perspective and or the justice perspective, they're not exclusive. It's not an either or, it's a both and. But so many times we want to do just the charity part because that's the easy part, make us feel good part. Poverty is about power, and power is about legislation, laws, and change. We got to get our hands dirty, we got to get messy, we got to get deep in the weeds, but to do that, we have to know with knowledge what we're really talking about. So tell us.
So very true, Larry. In my doctoral research, I put out a call for people to participate, and I wanted people from generations of poverty who were able to get bachelor's degrees because I wanted to illuminate their voices and say what really helped. And I had a guy call me. He said, "I'll do your study for you. I grew up poor." And I said, "Thank you so much. Tell me, how did your family get by?" He said, "Well, my father was a physician. He died. I was 12 years old. I had to go live with my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
Had the right mindset, work ethic, determined. I worked in their store, pulled myself up, and became a doctor like my dad." Now, I'm processing that from the context of generations of migrant labor, poverty where nobody's literate, everybody's electricity's being shut off, we're constantly being evicted. And I'm thinking, you knew someone who owned a store and you were related to them? That is so
That's a leg up.
But then if you look at it from his perspective, who do the children of professionals hang out with?
Yeah.
So we compare ourselves to the people around us. And if you grow up around people who have more than you, likelihood you grow up poor is high. So I started thinking everybody in America grew up poor because everyone I talked to, well, we were poor, we had nothing but a farm.
Right,
Like you own land.
nothing but
A guy
exactly.
in New York, an attorney, said, I'm a successful attorney, you just have to want it. And I said, well, how did your family eat? And he said, oh, well, my dad owned a restaurant. Anyone could do that. And I'm like, there's some things that have to happen before you own a restaurant.
Right.
So I began realizing there wasn't a clear definition in the public of this thing called poverty, and even at the federal level. The federal level for a family of 4, the federal poverty guideline is right about 25,000. And I've worked in all 50 states, and I've asked thousands of professionals, how many of you could take care of a family of 4 on 25,000?
No way.
Our economic formula to calculate what poverty is based on 1960s cost of
Right,
living.
right.
Doesn't include childcare, transportation, or health care. So that number, 25,000, puts a lot of people who are just over, unable to get Head Start, unable to get Pell Grants, unable to get help
Yeah.
that they truly need and not going to get anywhere else. So I began working on developing research based on different lived experiences. So generational poverty, typically there you have a lot of folks who struggle with literacy. These are the folks that are going to schools where, you know, most people will call up a real estate agent and say, where are your good schools? Well, these are not the schools that people in generational and working class are going to. These are the schools most middle class people would never
Never
send
go
their
to.
kids to. So they're going to schools that are overwhelmed, teachers that are overwhelmed, under-resourced schools. These are families that work that day for food that night. It is about making it through the day. Working class poverty, William Julius Wilson is a scholar, Barbara Ehrenreich is a scholar who do brilliant work on working class, that living paycheck to paycheck, not having a lot left over, and beginning to believe that there's something wrong with you because you're working but you're not making it. And the number one stereotype about people in poverty is that they're lazy.
Yes.
Yet census data tell us most people in poverty hold more than one job.
Exactly.
And according to HUD, they can't afford a place to live anywhere in our country.
Right, affordable housing is not available.
Yeah, we tend to not address the true structural causes of poverty because of our ignorance about poverty. We have immigrant poverty, where people struggle not only with the Maslow needs of needing shelter and food, but also with language barriers, cultural barriers. We have situational poverty, and that would be the story of the guy whose father died when he was 12. So he didn't grow up without his teeth saying ain't every other word, like everybody I knew. I thought when you're 30, your teeth go in a cup. When you're 60, you die. And it's true that the deeper the poverty, the earlier you lose your life, because poverty kills.
Right.
So, and there's even mixed class poverty. I had people who said, I'll do your study for you. My mom grew up generations of poverty, but my dad was more middle class. Well, that person's going to have a different exposure and experience than somebody who has 2 parents from generational poverty. So in my book, See Poverty, Be the Difference, I go into the many different lived experiences of poverty to really provide a foundational understanding so that when we meet people and we hear their narratives, we aren't projecting assumptions on to what they can do.
Right.
Now, let me give you an example of that. I'm 26 years old. I can't read a newspaper. I can't write a complete sentence. I thought the whole page was a paragraph. I do say ain't every other word. I'm on welfare. I have a 6-year-old daughter, Jennifer, 2-year-old Daniel. My 15-year-old cousin is living with me because she's homeless. And welfare says we won't help her because she's not your child.
Right.
So we're living on $408 a month from welfare. My rent in a neighborhood called Felony Flats in Portland, Oregon was $395. So I had $13 left over after paying rent. When I got an eviction notice, because I'd pay the rent one month, the utilities the next month, my eviction notice, I went to the welfare worker and she said, well, if you have an eviction notice, you're now mandated to money management classes. And then when I went to see her one time, she said, we have a great new program. If you just save some money and be responsible, we'll match it and you can get out of poverty. I'm like, I got $13. And the truth is that I worked my whole life. My family were migrant labor workers. I worked in a foam rubber factory for 2 years minimum wage, and we still got evicted. We still went hungry. Didn't matter how hard we worked. Because think about it, who works harder? The person cleaning their hotel room or the person in their office?
Right.
You know, so many people working hard, and they can't afford food. In Houston, you've got about 1 in 5
Yes, we do.
experiencing some level of poverty.
People don't really believe that when we talk about that number in Houston.
These are
1 in
real
5.
people
Yes.
behind those numbers. It's your grandmas, it's your grandpas, it's your sisters and your cousins and your uncles. These are people, but what's happened is we graduate people from college without the history of poverty in the United States of America. And that's what I learned. I grew up believing, well, I think people don't care, because I would watch my mom and my dad, they would go to ask for help, plastic or glass between them and the people. And the tone of voice my mom was talked to and the way she was treated, she would leave just in tears saying, I can't ask anymore. I can't ask. It was so beating her down. But what I learned when I got to the university and started having conversations about poverty was 2 things. One, they cared. And that was a big part of my growth. Mother Teresa says, to believe your fellow human beings don't care is more painful than hunger. I fully agree with her. And the second thing I learned was they didn't have a clue. They could no more describe my life in generational poverty than I could talk about middle-class norms. Like one of my first trainings 30 years ago was for the largest law firm in the Northwest. They wanted me to talk about communicating more effectively with families, and they had a buffet lunch. I got my food, I'm eating, and I'm just happy thinking I've died and gone to heaven. These several hundred attorneys are going to listen to me, who said ain't every other word. And I'm eating, and I finally look up, and nobody else is eating. And I don't know why.
Wow.
I couldn't figure it out. I'm looking around, looking around. I finally asked this attorney, how come people aren't eating their food? She said, oh, well, we wait till everyone gets a plate to be polite. And in my mind, I'm like, who told you that? Could you share it with the class? I'm not stupid, but I got 5 brothers. I live in the deepest poverty. And what do you think would happen if I waited? I'm not going to get to eat. So some of the behaviors we ask people to do don't make any sense in their context. So I think encouraging people to get poverty informed. We talk about cultural competencies. I teach poverty competencies. Read See Poverty Be the Difference. It's a powerful book to give you a look at your own attitudes and beliefs and activities you can do to really understand how to communicate, relate, and leave people in a better place than you find them. Everybody can do something. And you have that opportunity when you come into contact with a human being. Leave them in a better place or leave them worse.
I want to get back to the time we have to the structural stuff. Addressing poverty from the structural issues, to me, is really where the long-term benefit, the strategic change, the systemic change is going to come. That is the area that people find very difficult to get into. And I think we're going to have to train up a whole new group of warriors, a whole new group of advocates who really understand that you're not going to see the change you want to see so badly unless you get into the structural part of it. And that takes a certain skill set. That's where I kind of work in that area. It's the politics involved, but it's also the skill set of how to be effective in that environment and not have people put you off, because their whole goal is to put you off. And if you let them put you off, they win.
Yes. Well, and you so often hear people say, well, it's the system, what can I do? Everybody thinks someone else has the power to make the change. And I say, systemic change is not easy. If it were, Dr. King would have done it. Look what he was able to do. But who makes up the system? It is people. And when people are poverty informed, they can look at their policies and say, is this policy to sanction a woman for going to school, a single mom for going to school, and take away her $150 that she's surviving on? Is that a good policy? Or I worked with a school district, and they had 100% of their kids in poverty. And this teacher said, you got to help me with this kid. She said, I've tried everything. I said, what have you tried? She said, I took away recess. I don't give him extracurricular activities. I don't allow him to do athletics. And he's still late every day, and he won't do his homework. I'm like, what do you call homework when you don't have a home? And what's the why behind that? What's going on with this little guy, this little 10-year-old kid? And I found that 10-year-old kid. He was living in the back of a pickup truck with his grandpa. And for 7 months of the school year, he made it to school.
Yeah.
And what did he get? A tardy slip, a truancy slip. So that school, in their poverty competency plan, they changed their tardy slips to "We're so glad you're here." So you are
like that.
spot on that we have a transportation crisis. We don't
Yep.
have transportation to get people where they need to be when they need to be there. So our ignorant response to that is to create a law saying, don't drive unless you have car insurance.
Right.
We don't have transportation. So I drove illegally 14 years. Would I like to have car insurance? You bet.
I bet.
A childcare crisis, a housing crisis. I mean, these are the true causes of poverty, but we got to get to those.
And we got to get out of here for right now because time is gone. It's going to be on the screen. It has been, but I want you directly to tell people how to get in touch with you.
You can contact me at Communication Across Barriers, www.combarriers.com. You can also Google Donna Beegle. I'm Googleable.
And the title of the book again is?
I have 5 books. See Poverty, Be the Difference is the one I recommend people start
Okay,
with.
all right.
Because it provides that foundation.
Right.
But I also have Breaking Poverty Barriers to Equal Justice, If Not Me, Then Who, Action Approach for Educating Students. And my newest book will be called 11%, because if a student from poverty actually makes it to college, only 11% leave with a degree or certificate.
That's for sure. We know that very truly here. All right, trying to break the cycle. So here we go. Thank you, Donna, very
You're so
much for being with us. We could probably have a wonderful discussion for another couple hours here. What is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? What's that baseline thing we can agree on, that all human beings, just because they are human beings, no other designation necessary, deserve because they are human beings, our fellow human beings? That is the first question. There are 2 other little points that go with that very important question. All human being lives matter. All human beings are equal. We don't believe the latter 2. To have the conversation about the first one has to happen before you can even buy into the latter 2. So I think it's time, from an ethical perspective, for all those people who say they care, for all those people from every walk of life, every denomination, church, parish, temple, synagogue, or mosque, I don't care, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, worship is all the same. It's an ethical question. What is the fair and ethical treatment of all human beings? We need to have that conversation to get out of this where we are, to begin to see human beings, not as the individual and person that we love to talk about, but that sense of who we are connected to each other as our fellow human beings. It's a we and us conversation. It's not the I and me that we try to have in this country. So we're going to kind of look at that going forward here on Dialogue Houston. What does it mean to really look on we and us and not I and me? Democracy is about we and us, not I. Nowhere have I read I to people. We tend to operate that way in this country, I to people. So it's a whole list of things that go with this kind of conversation and dialogue. But I'm convinced relationships is still the key. Relationships built on mutual trust and respect, because nothing happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust. And so we can develop the relationships, have the trust, begin to have the dialogue. And again, as I said in the beginning, all change is linguistic. We have to be talking with each other, not to each other. Have to be talking with each other. We're going to get out of here. We're going to continue this wonderful journey in 2020 here on Dialogue Houston. Hope you will be part of it and join us. Until then, as always, till the next time, peace, power, and love.